This talk is given by Vanessa Zuisei Goddard, a writer and lay teacher based in Panama City, Panama. Zuisei is also the guiding teacher of the Ocean Mind Sangha, a virtual community of Zen practitioners. And this talk, like all of her talks, is offered freely. If you'd like to offer a donation to support Zuisei's work, listen to other talks, or find out more about the Ocean Mind Sangha, please visit us at oceanmindsangha.org. Thanks for listening.
Good evening, everyone. It's good to be here practicing dharma with all of you. It's good to be in the company of noble friends. It's good to be here on this earth at this time. Tonight we are covering the last skillful sign in the Vitakka Santana Sutta, the relaxation of thoughts. And this sign I've called chop, for the practice of cutting off at the root a thought that because of its nature, we don't want to give any space to, any time, any chance for it to take hold in our mind. Maybe because it's an especially sticky thought, or an especially noxious thought, or an especially distracting thought. And we can look at some examples in a moment. But first, I wanted to say a word about the term vitakka in the title of the sutra. I should have done this at the beginning of the series, but I neglected to do so. And so let me do it now. Vitakka is the Pali for thinking, or some teachers would say applied thought. Santana is bringing something to a standstill, cutting off its momentum. And this is a definition that's especially helpful in this last nimitta, this last sign of crushing mind with mind. The term vitakka usually appears in the sutras as a compound with the word vichara, which means discursive thinking, or again, according to some, sustained thought. And so together, vitakka vichara are considered to be the verbal function of the mind, our inner dialogue, in other words. So when we speak of practicing noble silence, as we do during a retreat, for example, this instruction refers both to outer speech, but also very importantly, to vitakka vichara, to refrain from it, to refrain from that incessant dialogue that keeps us separated from reality. That is why it's so important to sit still. That's why it's so important to still it. It's not innocuous. Every moment we spend talking to ourselves about what we're going to have for dinner, for example, about that awful racket our neighbor was making last night, what we should wear for that important meeting at work tomorrow. We're engaging in vitakka vichara. But not only that, it is obscuring reality as far as we're concerned. It's like it's a wall between us and the world, between us and what is actually happening in a moment. It reminds me of Annie Dillard, saying in Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, that in our usual way of seeing, we're like a blind person at a ball game with a radio pressed to their ear. We're moving through the world with a commentary running incessantly through our minds because we think that to know anything, we have to explain it to ourselves. This is how we make it real. I'd say we're like a seeing person at a ball game with a radio pressed to our ear. We do see what's going on, And still, we talk to ourselves about it, as if perceiving it on its own were not enough. Practice, on the other hand, shows us that it works in the opposite way. That to really know what's going on, we have to shut up. We have to get quiet enough to see what's in front of us, not what we have created with all of that verbal fabrication. And note here that the full phrase that is used in the sutra is Vitaka Sankara Santanam. And so there they are again, Sankara, or the Sanskrit samskara, which we might remember from our study of dependent origination. Samskara are our mental fabrications. They're the creations which we hold so dear and which confuse things so. I remember many years ago having an interaction with my teacher. I was telling him about some problem I was having. And I expected that he would be sympathetic, or that at least he would tell me how sorry he was, that I was going through that. But he listened, and then he just nodded and changed the subject. And in the moment, I was fine. I just took it as, he was saying it's no big deal. Right. But afterward, I started thinking about it again. And then a story began to take shape. Why doesn't he care? My teacher doesn't care about me. And if he doesn't care, no one does. And before long, I had a full-blown pity party going. This is what our stories do sometimes. This is what our thinking does. What it can do. What it can do. And so, in the context of the sutra, discursive thinking is vitaka vichara. The thinking and more thinking, as one teacher translated it, that gets in the way of us seeing directly, seeing clearly. That is why the sutra is focused on stilling these types of thoughts, on doing what we need to do to quiet them down. It is so that we can see. But there's a bit of a catch here, because vitaka vichara also appears in the description of the first jhana. And this is why some teachers translate it as initial and sustained thought, or directed thought and evaluation. And say that the Buddha was saying that we need these to focus our attention. Which of course is true. We need to be able to hold the breath in mind, in our awareness, and then we need to be able to keep our attention on it over time. We need to be able to reflect on what we're doing and correct our attention if it wanders. We need to be able to evaluate the result of our application. And so it's a little bit confusing, because as I mentioned, some teachers say no. When we talk about vitaka vichara, we're always and only referring to thinking. All of those background thoughts that you can and should let go of if you really want your concentration to grow stronger. Sustained thought and evaluation are something else. And you do need them to establish your concentration. I just think of koan study. You need to be able to memorize the koan, think about the question, and hold it in mind. When you get distracted, you need to be able to see that, let go of the distracted thought, and return to the koan. And It's also absolutely true that to see deeply into the koan, you have to let all that thought die down. There were so many times when I went in to see my teacher in the Doksan room. I presented my koan, answered his probing questions, and came out of the room with no idea about what had happened. I simply could not have told you what I said, what he said. No idea. I passed the koan. I answered the questions. So there was insight, but no conceptualization. And this can definitely happen. You see something and don't know intellectually what it is you've seen. Not in the moment. And then over time, you learn to integrate the two. And so on one hand, no thinking at all won't help us. Just thinking won't help us either. Which means we need the right kind of thinking at the right time. Which takes us back to the need to let go of vitaka vichara. As I said, at some point, we just have to get quiet. Otherwise, all of our talking will get in the way. It's a little bit like walking around with a mirror before your face. All you see is yourself instead of what's in front of you. If you see through a glass darkly, as St. Paul once said. Someone was telling me about a photo, I think it won some sort of award. And it was of a young woman standing before the Grand Canyon. And you can see just this majesty unfolding behind her. But she can't see it because she has her phone out and it's up to her face and she's taking a selfie. Very close up. We miss so much when we see so little. Imagine a tick on the edge of a blade of grass going, whoa, look at this mountain. It's amazing. Meanwhile, it's a speck in one piece of grass in a huge field at the edge of a town in a country that's only one of 195 countries in the world. In one planet out of 100 billion in the galaxy. In a universe that has about 2 trillion galaxies. What we see is but a sliver of what there is to see. So, we've been working on switching a distracting thought. And if that doesn't work, warning ourselves of the danger of keeping that kind of thought going. If that doesn't work, we ignore the thought, we remove our attention from it, so it loses momentum. If that doesn't work, then we trace the thought back to its root. We get very quiet, very still, and try to find a place that the thought comes from, which is the same place that a thought goes to when it goes. Have you ever tried that? Trying to catch the moment that a thought appears, or the moment when it fades? Where does it go when it goes? Where does it arise from when it pops up? If you can see that clearly, you've already arrived. There is no more work for you to do, and you don't need this whole switch thing. You're already a master of the courses of thought, as the sutra says. You think what you want to think, and you don't think what you don't want to think. But if you haven't, seen that place before thought, and thoughts of greed, hatred, and ignorance are still plaguing you, then you can use this last tool, what I call the nimitta of last resort, the no holds barred sign. We chop the thought right as it comes up, not giving it any chance to take hold in the mind. We crush mind with mind. The sutra says, like a strong man who grabs a weaker man by the head or throat or shoulder and squeezes, squashes, and crushes them. It's an unfortunate simile, and it seems at odds with what meditation is supposed to be, doesn't it? Also, what this sutra is all about. I mean, it's called the relaxation of thoughts. And it is at odds. But I think of this as the sign that is the contingency plan. When switching and warning and ignoring and tracing have not worked, that means you're dealing with some serious thoughts. And being serious, they have the potential to do serious damage. Let's just have one. The alcoholic thinks to themselves. That's the kind of thought you want to chop. Any thought that starts with, what if? What if the test comes out positive? What if I lose my job because of it? What if I can't make ends meet? What if I end up homeless? Any thought that starts with always or never, everyone and no one. I always fail. I never get what I want. Everyone hates me. No one understands me. These thoughts will take you nowhere good. And so you cut them down before they have a chance to proliferate, like bacteria. And the full reference to this sign in the sutra says, if unskillful thoughts, imbued with desire, aversion, or delusion, still arise in the mind, then, with your teeth clenched and your tongue pressed against the roof of your mouth, you should beat down, constrain, and crush mind with awareness. And it's a reference to one of the first practices the Buddha did when he spent those 6 years with the wandering ascetics after leaving his palace. To tame his mind, he tried all sorts of ascetic practices, not eating, not breathing, not sleeping. And the first one he tried was this: why don't I, with teeth clenched and tongue pressed against the roof of my mouth, squeeze, squash, and scorch mind with mind? And so that's what I did, until sweat ran from my armpits. It was like when a strong man grabs a weaker man by the head or throat or shoulder and squeezes, squashes, and crushes them. So it's pretty much word for word what appears in the Vitakka Santana Sutta. And some scholars argue that it's out of place in this relaxation of thought sutra, that it was a later addition. But from experience, I can tell you that this sign is sometimes necessary, where you don't argue with the thought, you don't negotiate, you simply cut it off at the pass, right? You don't let it advance. And one teacher described this sign as a disciplined act of non-cooperation. I really like that because it shows it's not just about willpower. Seeing that this thought will harm me, I decide very deliberately to not cooperate with it. It's like that moment when you simply close the app in the middle of your 10th reel. No more. you say to yourself, this isn't helping me, so no more. Of course, the danger is we might suppress something that we need to look at. It's like playing whack-a-mole with our thoughts. So we have to be careful. We can remind ourselves that we're slowly chipping away at the defilements. That's what this whole series is about. So that the bright light of wisdom can shine in our minds. Right? You're not just crushing mind with mind to crush the mind. It's so that this bright light can shine. There's a line in the liturgy that we do to celebrate the Buddha's enlightenment that says, "May the bright light of wisdom shine forever, banishing the dark night of ignorance." And that's followed by, "May we diligently and sincerely carry forth your dharma." We're speaking to the Buddha when we say this. That's why we're doing all this work, to diligently and sincerely carry forth the Buddha's dharma. Let's not lose sight of that. Because we can be off in our little corners with our minds roiling, our bodies hurting as we do zazen, and think, what's the point? How is this helping? How does sitting zazen make any difference in the world? Periodically, I get asked this question. And one way to answer it is to look at your own mind. When you sit, does it make a difference? Are you quieter? Do you see more clearly? Are you less reactive? Are you a little kinder, a little more patient, a little more alive? If the answer to any of those questions is yes, then you can rest assured that this is what you're bringing to the world. The line between inside and outside is very thin, like an eggshell. It's actually non-existent. That's what we see when we get very quiet and very still. One of the Christian mystics, Dionysius the Areopagite, said, "Leave behind everything perceived and understood, everything perceptible and understandable, and be raised up as far as possible to that which is beyond all being and all knowledge." In Zen, for us, the feeling might be more one of going down. Right? We go down into the depths of our being, to that place that is beyond being and knowing. And if you still have any doubts about whether going to that place is worthwhile, whether it has anything to offer you or the world, my suggestion to you is go there. Let go of all you can perceive and understand. Let go of all that you can think about, talk to yourself about, and go there. See for yourself what cannot be perceived or understood. And then I assure you, you'll know what it is for. You'll know what this practice is for. Without a doubt, you'll know. I promise you.
For more talks, to get more information about Zuisei's teaching, or to join her email list, visit us at oceanmindsangha.org.